Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight in Nairobi, hundreds of Kenyans demonstrate at the country's largest public hospital to demand that management act on allegations of the rape of patients. Also, the UN says that Congolese security forces targeted UN monitors during violence over the weekend. At least 6 people were killed as police used deadly force to break up anti-government protests. And he was known as the father of South African jazz. Legendary musician and anti-apartheid activist Hugh Masekela has died aged 78. He passed away after a decade-long fight with cancer. We take a look back at his career. But first, a peaceful demonstration was held outside of Nairobi's main hospital on Tuesday, with protesters denouncing allegations of the attempted rape and sexual harassment of patients. More than 24 women at the rally claimed to have been assaulted at Kenyatta National Hospital. Activists reportedly believe that nurses at the institution even warn breastfeeding women to travel in groups when moving through the hospital.
Women have complained that they've been raped when they're going to nurse their babies who are 2 floors away, which should not even be the case in the first place. And we want the hospital to take responsibility and provide new moms and their children a facility that is safe.
Today, I feel like so much has come to light. For this past week, so much has come to light and more people are coming out. And I mean, who can allow a woman who has just given birth to be raped? Yeah, we live in a society where we need to protect women. Yeah. The person who's supposed to protect you is the same person who is raping you. So where are we going as a society?
Well, staff at the hospital say that they've received no official complaints, but the Ministry of Health has ordered an investigation and the allegations have struck a nerve across the country. Ruben Kiama tells us more.
The hospital has denied the allegations. They say the claims that were posted in the social media were just allegations, but so far no one has come out to record a statement with the police. So the hospital has denied the allegations, but they have also supported the government in calling for a criminal investigation. Sometime last week, there was a Facebook post by one of the activists, and she used the story of a new mother who alleged that she was nearly raped in the corridors of the Kenyatta National Hospital while she was going to breastfeed her child. Many women, as soon as they saw that post, some came out, and they said they have also been victims in the same hospital. And this has caused a lot of public outcry. Since last week, there has been a lot of even the political leaders, especially women leaders in parliament, have called for investigations into the issue. And this was actually part of the protest today followed another march yesterday as well, where we saw many women leaders also coming out and trying to denounce what happened in the hospital.
Ruben Kiama there for us in Nairobi. Now, the UN says that Congolese security forces targeted UN monitors during violence over the weekend. At least 6 people were killed as police used deadly force to disperse protests against President Joseph Kabila. Around 70 people were injured in the violence, one of whom was a UN monitor who was clearly dressed as such when he was attacked by security forces. Violent incidents have escalated in the country since Kabila stayed on past the 2016 end of his constitutional term. Earlier, I spoke to Ravina Shamdasani from the UN Human Rights Commission and asked her about the ramifications of the attack on UN staff.
The deaths are very worrying. We are talking about 6 who were killed on Sunday, but this follows the death of another 9 protesters on December 31st, when protests were held back then. The injury of a UN human rights monitor is particularly significant because if this is the way that the security forces are going to treat a UN human rights officer, it really leads to a lot of worries about how they're going to treat Congolese protesters. It shows that perhaps they've become a little bit more brazen than even before.
And do you believe that the violence seen over the weekend was a one-off?
Well, no, as I said, on the 31st of December, we already saw 9 people being killed. On Sunday, we saw another 6. The political tensions are nowhere near being resolved. In fact, there are worries about a further escalation, given that security forces fired tear gas into churches, targeted, churchgoers, prevented them from accessing places of worship. And this is not just limited to Kinshasa. We're talking about Goma, Mbujimai, throughout the country, really. We are concerned that there will be a further escalation, and we're calling on the authorities to take all measures to try to diffuse the tensions, to try to meet political leaders, political opposition leaders, religious leaders, as well as civil society members to resolve the situation.
Well, I ask you whether you think that the violence was unusual because the DRC government, Kinshasa, is blaming civilians for the unrest, but also seems to be surprised at the security forces' actions as recorded over the weekend. Kinshasa has also condemned aggression against UN personnel. But do you believe it's actually doing much to avoid unnecessary violence during the sensitive time ahead of planned elections later this year?
No, it is important that they have condemned these acts of aggression against the UN. However, we're talking about a large number of people that were wounded, and this was the second time in less than 3 weeks that this has happened. So much more needs to be done. The condemnation of such aggression is welcome, but we are asking for investigations to take place and accountability for those who are responsible for the violence, the security forces responsible for the violence, to be held to account. And we have not seen that yet. And we are hoping and encouraged by the comments made by the government that this will happen. Failing that, the tensions are only going to rise.
Do the long-standing concerns about insecurity in DR Congo and the concerns about the government's role in alleged violence and abuses undermine the country's credibility as a member of the UN Human Rights Council?
Well, this is a long-standing political crisis, and that is all that it is. It's a man-made political crisis. There was an agreement that came about in December 2016, including confidence-building measures as well. And this agreement was welcomed at the international level, including by the Human Rights Council and including by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. However, it's very disappointing that we have not seen these confidence-building measures being implemented. And instead, we are seeing a return to the repression of protests. And this repression has not only occurred in the form of violence and the alleged use of excessive force by security forces, but also in them carrying out arbitrary detentions of political opponents and civil society, to the extent that now political opponents and civil society have little rallying power because they've been repressed to that point. And it is the church that is now mobilizing people to speak out in defense of their human rights.
In other news, Kenya film buffs are ecstatic over the nomination of a homegrown film that has been nominated for an Oscar. Watu Wote, which means all of us in Kiswahili, is one of 5 productions up for a prize in the live action category. It's a harrowing account of an attack in Mandera town in 2015 when militants from Islamist group Al-Shabaab ambushed a bus that was carrying workers travelling south for their Christmas holidays. The film premiered in Nairobi on Tuesday, and we of course wish it the very best of luck in March. Finally, he was known as the father of South African jazz. Legendary musician and anti-apartheid activist Hugh Masekela has died aged 78. He passed away after a decade-long fight with cancer. Nicolas Chemin takes us back.
Hugh Masekela's most famous song is Grazing in the Grass. It was an international #1 hit in 1968. The trumpeter was born 3 decades earlier in South Africa. In 2013, he told France 24 how he became an anti-apartheid activist at an early age.
I grew up in rallies, I grew up in boycotts, I grew up in marches, I grew up in massacres. It was all part of our lives. But I grew up in a society that was resisting.
After the Sharpeville massacre in 1960, when 69 anti-apartheid protesters were killed by the police, Masekela left South Africa. He lived in the US for 30 years, but kept a close eye on events in his homeland.
to a great extent, like when there was a news blackout in South Africa, we knew more about what was happening in South Africa than like our relatives and what they'd call us to find out what was happening where they were living.
In 1964, he married renowned singer Miriam Makeba. In all, he tied the knot 4 times. Throughout his life, he mixed jazz with South African styles and music from across the continent. Masekela returned to South Africa in 1990 when Nelson Mandela was finally released after having spent 27 years in jail. 3 years earlier, the jazzman had written his celebrated song about Mandela, Bring Him Back Home.
Bring back Nelson Mandela, bring him back home to Soweto. We want to see him walking down the streets of South Africa tomorrow.
And that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Take care.